All right, so my presentation is called Personality Disorders in the Community. It's called that because that's exactly what I did. Um, what I wanted to do is I wanted to assess the needs of individuals with personality disorders in the community and find out what limitations and barriers they are to good treatment for people with personality disorders. Um, this came about because I've noticed a sort of a problem working inpatient where we frequently get admissions and readmissions of people with personality disorders, in particular borderline personality disorders. So that kind of spurred this little project. So what I did is I interviewed three mental health professionals. Oddly enough, I was able to do um, all three different disciplines. So I got to interview a licensed psychological examiner, or LPEI, um, an LCSW, and an LPC. So that got me a pretty interesting perspective. Um, so what I wanted to know is why. Why do people with personality disorders come back so frequently? Well, is it the lack of training? Are there specific issues that each of these organizations that I interviewed are facing? You know, what is it? What's going on out there that's causing these people to come back so frequently and have to see me? Um, so at Birch Tree Communities, I interviewed Tim Hughes. He's an LPEI, an independent licensed psychological examiner. Um, and you know, we talked about personality disorders, and one of the big things that he talked about is that when they do their notes, the paraprofessionals and professionals both, they have to be specific about what they're targeting in that thing, you know, in that note. Um, and if it's anything at all that indicates personality disorders, Medicaid will reject it and it will not get paid for. So we have a Medicaid issue, a lack of funding for the treatment of personality disorders. So um, a lot of times they have to kind of tailor their notes, he said, and get creative. You know, if somebody has a personality issue, they may have to write it up as anxiety or related to depression rather than an attachment issue, for example. Another issue is that they at Birch Tree Communities primarily focus on people with serious mental illness, which isn't to say that personality disorders aren't serious, but they're not schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, the bipolar disorders, major depressive disorders, and stuff like that. So they're not too focused on specifically the former Axis 2 disorders like some of the other clinics may be. And he also noted that there's a lack of training for the MHPs and the MHPPs, the paraprofessionals. So the professionals, you know, they do their training through grad school, and then at the company training, they don't really get a whole lot outside of documentation. But the paraprofessionals, they have to sit through 40 hours, and when I went through paraprofessional training years ago, I understood this. Um, there was maybe a 5-minute blurb about how personality disorders are particularly difficult to work with. Um, the next place I was able to interview is actually my place of employment, Turning Point Behavioral Health, which is an inpatient psychiatric hospital for adults. So I kind of was able to kind of understand what was going on here a little bit better than the other places. But I interviewed not my supervisor, one of my coworkers, Audra. Um, and one of the things that she identified is, again, the lack of training for personality disorders, specifically and comically or not, depending on how you look at it, I suppose. The training module for borderline personality disorder was misspelled. It was board, like a board, BOARD. So not a whole lot of help there, I'm guessing. Another thing is that we're a short stay. um, Turning Point sees people for an average of about 7 days. Um, so, you know, that's not a whole lot of time to get into the specifics of what's going on, you know, in this person's background, you know, outside of their psychosocial. Um, you know, we don't really have time to dig in deep like somebody would outpatient. Um, and then, of course, there's the fact that currently there isn't a treatment option pharmaceutically for personality disorders. Rather, you can treat the anxiety and the sort of symptoms of psychosis, that those may be delusions or some of that dissociation that comes along with personality disorders, but there's not a specific pharmacological intervention for personality disorders. The last place that I got to interview, Counseling Associates. I actually interviewed here for an internship for this semester. One of the things that they identified is no intensive outpatient. They're in my town. There's no such thing as an IOP. Doesn't exist. Clients are expected to be seen weekly, maybe every 2 weeks, which decreases treatment compliance in their personality disordered individuals. They also noted a lack of qualified therapists, just not a whole lot of draw to work in Russellville as a counselor, I guess, and a lack of funding for Medicaid, from Medicaid. So the same thing that Birch Tree identified. So those are the options. Those are the problems that I found. My recommendation is that Medicaid has to pay to treat personality disorders. They're ubiquitous. They're everywhere. And they're not getting the help they need because they can't pay for it. Mental health treatment's expensive. Even with sliding scale options, these individuals are struggling. It's what it looks like to me. Training needs to increase. In Russellville, across the board, I asked about dialectical behavioral treatment. There's one therapist in my entire city of 27,000 people that does DBT, which is kind of the gold standard for borderline personality. And then community mental health needs an increase of funding overall, period, end of story. How to go about that, that's going to be a big macro issue, what with that being a government institution. So that's going to be where we're at. The last thing that I wanted to talk about right quick before I run out of time is future research. I want to know why is there not enough training for our professionals? Specifically, where is Medicaid going wrong with this reimbursement and funding process? And then I'd like to explore some further options to increase treatment compliance in people with personality disorders. So with that being said, I'll let you guys go. I've almost used up my time, so I appreciate whoever watches this, and thank you for this opportunity.